Trump will be arriving in Canada later today, and the conflict, no doubt, will be top of mind in Kananaskis, Alberta, when world leaders gather for that G7 summit, the annual meeting of 7 of the world's advanced economies and democracies, and Mark Carney's first summit as Prime Minister. Carney has also extended an invitation to several other countries like Mexico, India, Brazil, and Australia. All of this will take place, of course, against the backdrop of Donald Trump's aggressive tariffs on Canada and other nations. I spoke to Dominic LeBlanc, the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade. Minister LeBlanc, thank you for making the time.
Good morning, Rosemary.
I want to start with the G7. It does have an expanded list. There's the G7 happening on Monday, and then there's a sort of a broader group of nations that have been invited by the Prime Minister. What is the goal there by bringing some of those people to the table, whether it be Brazil, Australia, or others?
It's a tradition, I think, that's existed over a number of years of including, I know when Canada hosted the last one in Charlevoix, there were other countries as well. I think it speaks to economic security and prosperity issues. If we want to talk about critical minerals, energy security, the G7 countries obviously have a big part to play, but there are some of the bigger global economies that might not be in that bucket that could probably be invited. It speaks to, I think, a desire of the Prime Minister to focus on Canada's economic security. It should be, one would think, positive for other G7 partners. Also, in Canada's context, it continues our ability to diversify economic relationships beyond traditional partners as well.
And I imagine you will say that when I ask you about India, but there is consternation, even inside your own caucus, about inviting Narendra Modi, given that we do not have a sense that the Indian government has taken seriously some of the direct allegations that came from the former Prime Minister. Why should Canadians feel comfortable that he's been invited?
Again, for the reasons I won't repeat them, but India's economy and its role in global provisions of things like critical minerals, energy security is obviously significant.
But that doesn't mean we're turning a blind eye to past allegations.
On the contrary, absolutely. The RCMP, intelligence services are doing their work. I was the public security minister previously when some of these issues came to light. I have a lot of confidence in the RCMP completing their work. If you think about Thanksgiving weekend a year and a half ago, the RCMP commissioner had a public news conference to basically issue a warning. All of that work continues to be done, and all of those concerns remain. So the Prime Minister of India participates in a discussion with around global economic issues, takes nothing away from the importance of the rule of law in Canada, or the work that the RCMP and their partners continue to do.
So what does success look like then at this summit? We know there's not going to be a joint communique. Is it just about expanding relationships, developing more relationships? What should Canadians be watching for to come out of it?
Canadians, I think, will be seeing Prime Minister Carney exercising a very significant role in conversations around global security. So whether it's security and defense in the traditional context, whether it's foreign interference, whether it's issues like transnational crime, there is a focus on community and national security. I think that's important. There's also a focus on economic security. So if you think about how the economy has become fragmented or vulnerable to particular challenges, including from the United States. Other G7 partners have not been immune either from some of the trade actions of the Americans. I think the G7 is an opportunity for those countries to discuss with one another a way perhaps to put the global economy on a more reliable footing.
Is there any chance that there'll be any kind of deal with the United States? I'm not talking a whole global deal. That they reduce the tariffs on steel and aluminum as they seem to have agreed to with Mexico. Is there going to be any movement with the United States there? You're the one doing a lot of that work. Yeah,
and I'll continue to do that work. I'm hoping to talk to Ambassador Greer. It's not clear if Secretary Lutnick is part of the U.S. delegation. The trade representative is. Prime Minister, of course, will have a meeting with President Trump. Those conversations will be extremely important. I have learned, Rosemary, and I'm governed by the advice of people with a lot more expertise in these issues, like our ambassador in Washington, Kirsten Hillman. All of a sudden, this can start moving in a way that perhaps we didn't see. So if on Sunday it looks like there's no agreement, Monday night can suddenly be an agreement. And if we think we made progress 2 weeks ago, well, 2 weeks later, we haven't got the agreement we want. So we're going to continue to grind away at it, but with a real sense of urgency and frustration that obviously is fueled by what business and union and workers are telling us.
I'm sure you saw that we and Radio Canada reported on these documents that have been presented to Washington. I don't know how much back and forth there is. Perhaps there's other documents too. But one of the things that was included is the Golden Dome, because this is about not only having tariffs removed, but also the kinds of things that the president is interested in. How far along are you in sort of ticking off boxes in terms of here's what you want, here's what I want?
Well, not far along enough in the sense the tariffs haven't been lifted against Canada. Yeah. So we've been clear with the Americans that we're prepared to do significantly more in the defense, security context, dealing with some challenges to the North American economy, like the non-market practices of China, dumping steel and aluminum, amongst other things, in the North American economy. So those conversations are ongoing. This shouldn't surprise anybody.
No.
The Prime Minister said he wanted to negotiate a new security and economic partnership with the United States. So that's exactly what we're doing. And in those conversations, there are documents, drafts of documents that can be shared in meetings I've been in. I think you have to be careful one has to be careful. I saw some experts comment on whether these are agreements in the traditional sense of a binding agreement. You can exchange paper and documents in draft form to sort of focus the attention on the conversation we had, and that's the process that's been ongoing.
Would it be fair to say that there may be a conversation happening between the President and the Prime Minister, and everything seems to be going one way, and then you talk to Secretary Lutnick and it's a different way? Like, is it hard to focus the conversation given that the President is sort of notoriously hard to focus and might be getting different advice from different people around him?
Yeah, so I don't pretend to imagine how the administration is organized in the United States. And the premise of what you said would apply to conversations with Secretary Lutnick or Ambassador Greer, talking to our ambassador. Like sometimes it's like 2 steps forward and 1 backward. We make progress. We have what we think is a positive conversation about a particular issue. And then a few days later, there's different versions of the same issue that are raised, or different challenges are surfaced. So I think what's important, Rosemary, from our perspective, is the Prime Minister established with President Trump on that visit to the Oval Office after the election and in the working lunch afterwards, what we think is a constructive, respectful, business-like relationship. So all of the people I've spoken to say that that's critical for Canada to get the outcome we want. The problem is we're not getting it as fast as we want, and that's why we're going to continue to, for example, maintain retaliatory tariffs. The Americans raised that with us. The easiest way to remove Canada's retaliatory measures is to lift the tariffs that shouldn't have been applied in the first place.
I want to ask you one question about C5, the One Canadian Economy Bill. It does, the legislation, when it comes to the projects of national interest, it does put a lot of power in the hands of the minister, I think it would be you, to decide on which projects will be greenlit, and then subsequently to decide which conditions have to be met, because that happens after that first step, if I understand the bill correctly, and then gives you the power even to say, I'm going to not worry about these regulations. I'm going to just use these conditions, and maybe not even tell the public fully what you've agreed to and what you haven't to. That seems to be like an enormous amount of concentrated power in the hands of one minister to decide how something is going to unfold. Should Canadians be worried about that?
I don't think so. It shouldn't surprise Canadians that we put forward legislation that would allow the government to designate projects as being in the national interest with an expedited process, as rigorous and as important as would have been previous processes. The idea here is to expedite.
But it's kind of backwards, right? You're saying yes, and then you say the conditions, and then you can decide if you want the conditions or not. Is that not what you will be allowed to do?
First of all, that'll be based on advice from ministers responsible for individual statutes, environmental legislation, fisheries and oceans legislation. So this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Okay. This also happens with the participation of provincial and territorial governments, and it also requires an actual proponent. Most cases, it will be a private sector entity that comes with a provincial or territorial government and says, we want to undertake Project X. So there's a lot of, I get it, I've been an opposition MP too. You simplify things and you take a set of facts and characterize them in the most negative way and say that's how this is going to work. That doesn't necessarily mean in reality how this legislation will operate. We got a mandate from Canadians it's on page 1 of the Liberal platform, to talk about one Canadian economy, not 13, and to build big national projects again. Yeah. So it's a recognition that it's also urgent. It ties right back to our previous conversation about the threat of tariffs and what that does to the Canadian economy. We need to be able to take ourselves in hand and do things that perhaps previously were taking too long or the process was incoherent.
Okay. We'll talk about it more, but thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rosemary. Have a great day.
Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith will be greeting G7 leaders when they arrive in her province later. She's hoping to get some bilateral meetings of her own, but she is also focused on that One Canadian Economy Act that we were just talking about with Minister LeBlanc. The new legislation aims to cut trade barriers and speed up those nation-building infrastructure projects, energy projects, and pipelines, potentially. I spoke to Premier Smith earlier. Premier Smith, nice of you to make the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Lots to talk to you about. I'm going to start with some of the things around the nation-building project, C5, that piece of legislation. Last week, the Prime Minister said that he does believe that there needs to be a consensus built between provinces and communities to get projects going. Do you think that a province has the right to say no to a proposed project? How do you interpret how they're going to get to a yes?
Well, I would hope that what would happen is that we would identify whatever legitimate concerns that a province might have and then work through them. I know, for instance, the project that I'm interested in seeing built is a new pipeline, a bitumen pipeline to the northwest BC coast. Yeah. And there were problems in the past. I think that there has to obviously be a lot of Indigenous consultation and equity ownership right from the outset so that we can get the right route. And the other part, of course, is looking at ways that we can decarbonize the production. We've got a proposal from the Pathways group of companies, which are our biggest oil sands companies, so that we can have a lower carbon emission barrel going through that pipeline. And so those are the ways that I'm looking at how we can get to yes. I think the days of an engineer taking a ruler, putting it on a map and drawing a line are over. Some of this is going to require some negotiation.
So BC, as you well know, and as I'm sure viewers know, have said no. They don't want another pipeline through their province. You have said that you think you can convince the Premier. What would you put on the table to try and convince him?
Well, it's Team Canada or it's not. And I think that this is one of the issues that we face for a lot of years, is that it's always been easier for Alberta to build north-south than to build east-west. And I think that that's not where our Canadians are right now. With the threat of Donald Trump and the tariffs and the unreliability of the U.S. as a trading partner, I think that everyone is looking for ways that we can find projects where we can support each other. I would hope that at some point we'd have Premier Eby move to the same approach that we've seen with Wabkanu in Manitoba. I think he's got the highest popularity ratings of any premier, and he is also taking some challenging positions. I mean, he has got the first gold mine that has been approved in his province in 15 years. He has also openly said, as he develops out Churchill, that he includes in oil and gas pipelines as part of that economic corridor. So I think that that's the kind of spirit that Canadians are expecting, and I hope that we can get Premier Eby there as well.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that route from Alberta to the Port of Churchill, because that does seem potentially more likely. I don't know if it would be bitumen or it would be LNG or what would be there. But the other thing that I am hearing from Ottawa, whether it be Minister Hodgson or others, is that this isn't just about pipelines. So what else would be helpful to Alberta if you can't get there with a pipeline? And I understand that's your priority. What other things are you willing or interested in doing?
Well, I think we have to remember just how valuable a bitumen pipeline would be. We'd be talking about a million barrels a day in egress. And if you look at today's prices, that's about $20 billion a year in annual revenue year after year, going to markets that want our product, Japan, Korea, China, India. It makes a lot of sense for us to look at that. And so I don't think there's going to be any national project that is going to have that considerable amount of value.
What about the Port of Churchill, though? What could you get there, and how could you use that? Given that, as you've said, it seems easier to do. There's more consensus starting to be built around that idea.
I think it's both. I mean, I can make the same arguments going the other way as well. One of the advantages that we'd have of going to Churchill is that then, especially if you build icebreakers, you can go up and over and start feeding the East Coast refineries, as well as get your product into Europe, which is desperate for it. They want to wean themselves off supply from Iran. They want to wean themselves off supply from Russia. And so if we can find a way to get both bitumen and natural gas to them, I think that is going to help with their security. Plus, it allows for us to look at ways to build interties in our transmission system so that we can bring hydro from Manitoba, nuclear from Saskatchewan, connect with British Columbia, and then be also able to decarbonize our power grid even further and provide reliability to each other.
You and Minister Hodgson are using this phrase "grand bargain," and I wonder what that means for you. Is that making compromises? Is that being interested in dealing with emissions in a different way? What does that mean to you, that phrase?
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, the original Northern Gateway project was going to terminate in Kitimat, and I watched the video that showed that there's a lot to navigate in that Douglas Channel and a lot of concern from an environmental point of view. So being willing to say, is there a better port, a better terminal point? That's one. But also talking about the Pathways project in tandem, because right now, if you're going to invest $10 to $20 billion in carbon capture, as well as decarbonizing the power, as well as direct air capture. That's all just cost on the existing production. Yeah. But if you have that additional cost, but then you have additional source of revenue, it makes it a whole lot easier to do those projects together. So that's what we're hoping in the grand bargain, is that we can get both.
Would a grand bargain, though, Premier, also include you saying to the federal government, it's okay, C-69 can stay there if you're committing to helping me get more oil to market?
I like the idea of this 2-year time window. I mean, I think the fact that he wants to have a 2 years to yes timeframe is a demonstration that he knows the federal process is broken, because otherwise he'd say C-69 is perfectly fine and let's try to navigate through it. So what I hope would happen is that the projects that do make that national list and the 2-year fast track, that becomes a way for us to have a parallel track to talk about how we need to change and revise the other bills in order to improve investor confidence. I don't look at it as success if the federal government has to build every single project that would otherwise be built by the private sector, because the process is so cumbersome that no private sector investment wants to invest. That to me would be a failure. And so I think part of his job is to create an investment climate that tells the investor community, welcome back to Canada, because it hasn't done that for the last 10 years. We've lost, we estimate, somewhere in the order of $500 billion worth of investment. We want to bring some of that back, and it's going to require law changes to make it happen.
But that didn't sound like you would be unwilling to accept the fact that some of the things that are in place might stay in place, even if it means that other projects get approved. Because certainly Minister Hodgson seems to suggest that C-69 is staying, but that doesn't mean that they will be inflexible in terms of approving things.
Let's be practical. The federal government has jurisdiction for linear projects that go cross-border, that whether it's pipeline or whether it's transmission lines. Yeah. But the question is, do you need to do an intersectionality analysis of every single bill? Like there's measures that they've put into the bill that are not technical, that are ideological, and that don't really have any measurables around them and create confusion. So that's part of the reason why C-69 needs to be substantially revised. They also have a large portion of it struck down because they don't have the right to micromanage the projects that are within a jurisdiction, intra-provincial. And so they had a massive overreach on that front. So I think it needs to be substantially revised, and I hope that we're able to get there over the next couple of years, because 2 years to yes is pretty ambitious. I think the industry would like to see it faster than that, but we've got to keep up with the Americans, and they're changing their regulatory processes to be that fast as well. And if we don't keep up, we're going to lose this window of investment.
I want to quickly talk to you about the G7, which is taking place in your beautiful province. You will see leaders and you will have some access to them. Energy security is on the agenda. And I wonder whether you have any goals yourself for trying to convince some of these world leaders, the G7 leaders or the other people invited, that Alberta needs to be sort of front and center to some of the solutions that those countries might be looking for.
Well, I am International and Intergovernmental Affairs Minister as well. And so I've been doing a lot of that work over the last 2.5 years. I've traveled to Japan and Korea. I've spent a lot of time in the United States. I've met with every ambassador who's come through Alberta. And I've made that exact case is we're here and we're here to help, whether it's for propane, which Japan receives 15% of, whether it's our bitumen exports out of Trans Mountain Pipeline. Half of it is now going to destinations like China and Korea, or whether it's LNG, which we know that Europe needs so desperately and are already getting Canadian LNG out of the Gulf Coast. And so if we can do more of that, then we want to be the answer. But it does require us to be serious about increasing production as well. So we have to have those conversations together.
Are you hoping to talk to the president? Would that be someone that you would, given that you know him a little bit, would you hope to speak with him?
I do. I mean, I put in what the host jurisdiction does have an opportunity to ask for a bilateral with one of the world leaders. So I would like to meet with, if I can, with the U.S. president, with the Prime Minister of Australia, with Japan as well. I think that those three nations are. I think there's a lot of collaboration that we can do. So I think what the spirit that we're in right now is I think we want to improve our relationship with the U.S., yes, but we want to trade more with each other as provincial jurisdictions, and we want to work together on projects that allow all of us to get our products to international markets. So I think it's a huge opportunity to make that case on all fronts.
Okay, Premier Smith, nice to see you. Appreciate making the time.
Thank you, my pleasure.